Hello, this is your host, Todd Lewis, the Praise of Flight podcast. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe and hit the notification bell. Don't forget to also subscribe to Locals. YouTube doesn't always give people notifications, even if you hit the notification bell and subscribe. If you subscribe to Locals, you can get updates, which are tied to an email notification, so you can always be aware of new episodes and new videos that I'm doing. Plus, you can support me directly via Locals. The other thing as well, sort of riffing off why I'm not a libertarian, our side would start winning if we stop giving money to the other side, whether that's offshoring capital to China or giving money to Netflix, Amazon, Hollywood, all of these large, distant, unaccountable institutions. So one of the things is a much better way to spend your money than on Locals or than on Facebook or not Facebook, Hollywood or Netflix or any of these streaming services, HBO Max, Disney Plus, would be to support content creators like myself on Locals. That way you know that the money's going to a good cause. It's not going to go fund some transnational corporation that's then going to take your job overseas and leave you with nothing, stuck in middle America, or as a wage slave stuck on the big cities. So also, for those who have comments at the end, super chats will be read first, and then any other chats that are left, if I have time, I'll get to them on a case-by-case basis. So we've already got a lot of people here tonight. Unreconstructed, hello. 21st Century Longest, hello. Untried Path, hello. Minoan, hello. And Jacob J, hello. So tonight's episode is why I'm not a leftist. Broadly speaking, it's going to be subdivided into two parts. How the left doesn't benefit me, even if it were to, quote, be successful. And then two, it's not really even possible for the left to be successful. So what do I mean by the left? Well, obviously, the left is a big, large, woolly movement. But if it stood for anything over the last 300 years, it stood for the abolition of the money power. Whether you were an authoritarian leftist or a democratic leftist, a Marxist, or a socialist, or even a liberal. I mean, for example, in my own lifetime, I even remember the anti-Globalist liberals that used to protest with anarchists at like Black Bloc stuff, or most famously Occupy Wall Street, which I'll have a little bit more to say about that later. And so all the other elements that are added on, whether they're, feminist rights, indigenous rights, immigrant rights, trans rights, radical deep green environmentalism, whatever, all of these issues, they're sort of window dressing to the real central question of anti-capitalism. One of the things that you'll see is that they'll try to say, well, this is the real way to fight capitalism, whatever their hyphenated topic is, and we can get to that a little bit later as well, when in fact it has nothing to do with fighting capitalism. And the question is, the modern left doesn't even want to fight capitalism at all anymore. So, for example, we have the idea of the synthetic left, which has been come around by Caleb Maupin, who I've interviewed a couple times on the topic of the synthetic left. And the question is, does a quote-unquote authentic left even exist anymore? We'll get to that a little bit at the end as well. So let's start about why I'm not a leftist. There's basically three reasons. The left is anti-religious, and more specifically anti-Christian. It is anti-male. The sort of insane levels of atavistic hatred that I've seen against men is just, we'll have more to say about that. And now in recent years, the increasingly atavistic hatred of those of European descent. So let's start with the first one, anti-religion. Well, ultimately, we have a long tradition of people like, both the anarchist tradition and so there'd be the, quote, libertarian socialist tradition, as well as the authoritarian socialist tradition like Marxist, and even broadly liberals in general, this sort of anti-religious tendency, which, of course, this is an obvious contradiction, right? You're supposed to act in the name of the working class. Well, the working class is religious, always has been. And so what is this? This is ridiculous. This doesn't make any sense. And again, how are we going to take it that we're not going to have another round of Soviet-style purges? Oh, just trust me, bro. It's not going to happen. Trust me, bro. Well, no, I don't. Because every time people say that, it happens. And usually the first people that get liquidated are not necessarily the Christians. They're actually the co-revolutionaries. They get liquidated first, then the Christians. And but let's look at the Soviet Union. We also had Muslims and practicing Jews as well that were liquidated. And so, no, Buddhists in Mongolia and China have a similar story to tell, as well as in Vietnam. And so this is just something that, while the New Left reputedly, in the 60s and 70s, reputedly abandoned these principles, they have the same rhetoric. So, for example, if you look at the League of the Militant Godless, the slanderous blood libel from the Soviet Union about Christianity and religion more broadly, you hear the same kind of talking points from the New Atheists. You hear the same kind of talking points from radical leftists. I mean, I remember the years on YouTube that I would watch radical leftists, and they would be spouting the same old tired Soviet talking points. And, what does the left say, right? Well, in the stages of genocide, the first step is you have to character assassinate the people you're trying to kill. Well, good job trying to convince me that that's not what you're trying to do. The other thing is, if we look at what is atheism in its political manifestation? Well, again, per last night's stream when I mentioned Baudrillard, it is when the God becomes effervescent in the fourth level of simulation, the simulacrum, which leads to the epiphany or deification of power. And so one of the things is, once the revolutionary leftist gets to the top, or the leftist gets to the top of the power pyramid, the maintenance of that power seems to be his only consideration. Well, in fact, because this is a manifestation of the death of God through the simulacrum, and then it's just naked power. And again, we've seen what that can do, even in a less authoritarian setting, even in the United States, when we see, the Democrats wield power completely in a naked fashion. It's like they're not even trying to hide it anymore. So, no, I don't buy that. Isolating most of humanity, like 80% of it, is not a way to, fight the money power if that's what you in fact want to do. And if you don't, then you've radically separate. Then are you really a leftist anymore? Because again, the one common thread was the money power, and I guess also state power. But then you have the difference with authoritarian socialists, and then that's a problem. And then we have the anti-male, the sort of atavism of hatred against the male. And what a lot of this seems to boil down to, in my experience, is this idea that, all of human history was just a bunch of good old boys clubs, like, HBO's Mad Men. We're just, the guys were just, living it up at the expense of women, well, particularly white guys, but we'll get to the European element later, at the expense of women and everyone else. And I'm like, what in the heck do people think life was like before the Industrial Revolution? I mean, the dominant material condition we had to worry about was nature trying to kill you. You didn't have time to just sit around and imagine, how can I exploit and hurt other people? I mean, maybe if you were a king or a member of the merchant class in some empire or trading center, but otherwise, no. This is utterly ridiculous. What actually was going on is your goal was, how do I not starve today? How do I see, the machine gives you the illusion that you can meet nature head to head. But in reality, you have to actually plan ahead to get away from nature. Floods, hurricanes, famines, plagues, all of these are like, stampeding elephants or trains. You don't stop them, you get out of the way. So, for example, if you lived on the coast and you were paying attention to the sky to see which way the wind was blowing, to see the sun, whether it was red or not. So, for example, Christ says in Matthew 16, beginning in verse 2, he replied, "When everyone comes, you say it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning today will be stormy, for the sky is red and overcast." You know how to interpret the appearance of the sky, but you cannot interpret the signs of the times. Well, again, because you can't go sailing when it's storming. You just have to wait it out. And so the key here was to use the powers of insight in the intellect to be able to, through experience, through observation, look at the natural world around you, look at patterns around you, and seek to find ways to mitigate that. Not until we had machines did we think we could actually go head to head with nature and stop it. It was something that was closely tied to religious practices, right? Plagues and famines and storms and pestilences would be postponed if one served the gods, for example. The gods could go up against nature, right? That was one of the classical pagan archetypes. And so the other thing is, and this is actually from an actual Marxist, E. Balfour Bax, in his The Fraud of Feminism. This is the underlying fallacy, that the feminist prefers to see evidence of male oppression and the place women have occupied in social and political life, rather than the natural consequence of her organic constitution, her secondary sexual characteristics, and the natural average inferiority which flows therefrom. As regards the personal relations between men and women, an impartial view of the case must inevitably lead to the conclusions that whatever else a man in general may have on his conscience, no reasonable reproach lies to his score on regards to his treatment of women. The patience, forbearance, and kindness from which Socrates downwards, men as a rule have encountered the whims, the tempers, the tantrums of their often unworthy womankind is indeed a marvel. Okay, well, because again, this is obvious. Let's have a simple thought experiment. Let's say you had a tribe that had all the men stay at home and cook the food, and all the women go hunt woolly mammoths and fend off saber-toothed tigers in the Stone Age. That tribe is not going to survive. And we all know why. We're forced to accept a lie. And the lie is that men and women are biologically fungible. Now, to make a long story short, and all of this can be seen in other video content that I've done, the idea that people have to be treated as fungible, both with regards to sex and ethnicity and everything else, is that the machine needs cogs that fit in it. We can go back to Ivan Illich and his idea of the setup of systems. We can go back to Veblen and his machine process. And this idea of equality as fungibility is an imposition on all of us by, wait for it, capital. Capital. The very thing that they're purporting to fight is the one that is defining equality as a fungible characteristic that they embrace, which is insanity. It's madness. You know, The Art of War, Sun Tzu says, never accept your enemy's terms. This is just, I know, one of my favorite catchwords. It should be obvious, but it's not. Now let's look at the labor struggle, the struggle against machines, the struggle against capital, led by men, right? The Luddites smashed machines in the early 19th century. All the violent labor battles that took place in the United States and in Europe, where workers, actually shot and stabbed and traded blows with private security. The history doesn't record women doing that. Not that one would want them to, but again, if you're equal, if you're fungible, well, then get on the front lines. Do your part to fight the money power. They never do. They never do. The ones that fight. So again, it's a handful of men at the top of power pyramids but also it's the women, right? Think of like the queens, Marie Antoinette, let them eat cake. Her own class position renders her unsympathetic to the concerns of other men. And of course, women in an elevated class position have far more rights than peasants. So princesses and queens and the wives of merchants often have far more power than most men. And so again, the power that is exercised is based on the accumulation of power at the top of these dominance pyramids, whether it's state power or private power, not some innate biology. And then this just begs the question, what is this actually supposed to look like? Nobody can come up with a coherent definition of how social and sexual relationships ought to look between a man and a woman in a completely egalitarian society, because you can't, right? You can't. The assumption is that we are all equal, which really means fungible, which really means cogs in the capitalist machine, but we're not treated that way, and that's not fair. But you see, that's just clearly question begging. The inequity or the differences in treatment are the result of physical realities that we cover up and hide, referring back to my episode from last week about Jevons paradox and energy consumption and sexual liberalization being the creation of captive markets. Again, this is a joke. We have a whole slew of alphabet soups of sexual identities that are going to, fight the power, when in fact they're all captive markets based on the inelastic demand that their lifestyle has for certain commodities produced by capitalism, which would not be produced under socialism, because socialism isn't in the process of giving you captive markets. Again, it's ridiculous. The other thing is they'll say, well, the miracles of science are not equally distributed, or whatever. We see what has happened is going back to Baudrillard, and there's these stages. So stage 1 simulation is a largely accurate reflection of the real world. Stage 2 simulation is what it covers what's there. It hides what's there. Stage 3 hides what's not there. And then stage 4, simulacrum and hyperreality, makes no reference to reality itself and in fact objects to it. And I've actually seen this in real time. So when I went to college, the attack on, we were like at the, history was bad and people in the past were bad because they didn't accept these progressive values that we have today, which are, again, solely the result of modern industrial capitalism, the very thing that they're fighting. So again, try to figure that one out. But now they're saying we were always like that, right? Then I've seen, in real time since I left college, quote unquote historians saying that, oh yeah, we've always had something like these values in some form throughout history. No. It's ridiculous. It's absurd. Of course you don't have those things. And so now that we've reached the level of hyperreality and the level of simulacrum, now there's no even any need to appeal to the past. We can just create a new past, which is what Orwell was getting at in 1984. Now, and then lastly, for the anti-male issue, this is really the issue of material conditions, right? Again, leftism 101, nurture over nature, right? So things are the result of their material conditions. Well, the current system we have now is the result of a capitalist set of material conditions. Two things immediately flow from that. Everything before this could not have had similar social arrangements because they didn't have, wait for it, capitalist material conditions. Nor would we see this in socialism. For wait for it, it's not a capitalist material conditions. So this entire attitude is just based on, it's literally complete contradiction with their own sets of values. You would not expect egalitarianism any time before the industrial age because it's precisely a result of the industrial age. It is a product of the industrial civilization itself, which is being regurgitated back onto the past. Any appeal to Native Americans and hunter-gatherers is extremely disingenuous because the putative equality is not between all members of the society, but between the males, the warriors, the braves. In most Native American societies, they were extremely patriarchal. Women did all the menial chores and tasks. Polygamy was normal. They were swapped around like trading baseball cards. And, ritualized torture of captive women, both Indian and white, was normalized. Like this is not an egalitarian society. This is completely fabricated. This is not at all what we find with Native Americans. And so the equality was a kind of crude equality between warrior elites. But we saw that in ancient Greece as well with Sparta, with the homoioi. You'd all gone through the same school of hard knocks, so you're all equal now. But that's a very different kind of equality from the crude material fungibility that we're talking about now. Okay, then the other one is anti-European. Well, let's look at this as well. Who smashed the machines? The Luddites. Who were the ones that rose up in strikes and labor revolts? It was, well, white working class Europeans, whether it was in Europe or North America or Russia. And so again, what the immigration, which is a component of this anti-European sentiment, is of course, what is it? It is this is diluting the labor supply. Okay, so let's go back to leftist theory 101. How did the leftists formulate a theory for defeating private power? Well, the goal was to have full employment or near full employment, and then to have a national strike, or what Georges Sorel called the myth, the great myth that the revolution was striving towards, where you mobilize the majority of the population, working class population, into unions, and then you have a strike and then seize the means of production. You could argue something sort of like that happened in Russia in 1917. But what was the natural corollary of all this? Well, immigration restrictions. Until the 1980s, all Marxist parties had closed immigration restriction policies. The unions in the United States had, the AFL, the Knights of Labor, the CIO, immigration restrictions. Right? In any other context, these people would be called scabs, but they're not. Now, why is this a problem? Now, without making any appeals to superiority one way or the other, a diverse workforce is easily controlled. That's the goal. So there's a couple of concrete examples. One is Polybius in his History of the Mercenary War, and I quote, "For the Carthaginians, being always accustomed to employ mercenary troops of miscellaneous nationalities, in securing that any army should consist of several different races, act wisely as far for the prevention of rapid combination for mutiny or difficulty on the part of their commanders in overawing insubordinate concern." Well, there you go. There you go. We have White Fury by Christopher Petley, who talks about the slaveocracies in the Caribbean, where they would intentionally import Africans from all over the continent to then work for them because they wouldn't get along. They couldn't organize. It's literally their control grid. And the left has reached peak levels of insanity where they're going to fight the money power by embracing the money power's control grid. I mean, we are so far into the land of insane cuckoo land that, you begin to wonder if what we have now is a conspiracy by the CIA, as someone like Caleb Maupin would insinuate. Okay, you can't, as I mentioned, you can't organize a diverse workforce. Now, there's another reason for this, from just basic first principles. Diseconomies of scope. The wider the mandate you cast for your organization, the more money you're going to have to spend to expand the organization, the more money you're going to have for people that work within the organization, which means you're going to have to expand what you want to do. But you never actually get closer to what you want to do. It's just basic mathematics. It's just basic application of engineering principles. And again, the left just has like this smorgasbord, all you can eat buffet attitude to this, where you just keep on ladling things onto it. And it's like, this will never work. Now, a lot of these groups in more traditional leftist communities would not have been allowed to participate in the revolutionary process. Let's put it that way. We've already seen the tensions of diversity, right? In 2001, this is right before 9/11, we had a hilarious confrontation between Paul Watson of the Sea Shepherd versus Ward Churchill, the Native American / not Native American, actually, about the difference between the rights of Native Americans and whales. Who has more rights? It was ridiculous and hilarious. I saw a video on YouTube some time ago where there was a La Raza representative, so Chicano, and then a Native American. And this Chicano was saying, this is our land. We're going to claim our land back. And then the Native American was like, your land. And then they started fighting. And I'm like, okay, well, there you go. They can't even get along with each other, let alone organize to overthrow the private power. And then the other thing is, all these modes of thinking, of oppression, of domination, of control, and revolution are all Western concepts. Marx is using Western concepts. Now, for him, he sees himself as more of an extension of that. These people want to see themselves in opposition to that. But they're not really in opposition to that. It's like the atheist who's criticizing Christianity for not being Christian enough, by using Christian moral concerns. Well, this is just nonsense. So in addition to none of these three irrational atavistic biases helping me, they lead to an incoherent gobbledygook mess that is contradictory to many of their stated dogmas, such as the importance of material conditions, such as the idea that you have to have a unified worker front, which entails immigration restrictions, which fundamentally entails a less diverse force, and a complete lack of understanding of basic mathematics and engineering. You just can't have this smorgasbord, of every possible goal in the sun for an organization. Organizations that do best are those that have one goal. And for the classic left, the one goal used to be defeating the private power, which they don't do anymore. The other thing that we don't see anymore is, what does day one after the revolution even look like? We don't know. They can never tell us. Slavoj Žižek famously said, I don't know. So he said, I watched V for Vendetta. What's the day after the revolution look like? I don't know. Because nobody knows. And this is a problem all the way back in the beginning. Nechayev in his Catechism of a Revolutionary said that we don't know what it's going to look like. So you really just have this lashing out of left-wing atavistic anger, but in a way that doesn't actually do anything. They don't even know what they want. And, there were a lot of people that would interview Occupy Wall Street folks, and they said, what are you protesting? And they give these nonsensical answers, and they'd laugh, and, oh, isn't that funny? But you see, it's not actually funny, because this is a problem that even the most elite left-wing thinkers have had. Lenin didn't know what the end game was. He just knew he had to keep killing people to stay in power. So, what does all that mean? Now, the fact that these biases don't benefit me personally, but also don't provide any sensible platform on which to organize any putative resistance to the money power is very well articulated from this anonymous poster from 4chan. And he says, and this is found in the Occupy was destroyed by SJWs to protect the 1% by V Radio. As someone who participated in OWS, I can confirm that this is one of the reasons why the protests failed, if not the main reason. I can't begin to tell you how many meetings were derailed by women and minorities obsessed with identity politics. Time and again, white guys would provide plans for organization, suggested strategies, and begin outlining steps to the realization of a goal that the group agreed upon. Their plans were almost always met with objection from feminists, queer activists, blacks, Latinos, etc. all. A lot of the time, these people didn't even have a specific points of concern. Again, exactly, they don't even know what they want. They just stood up and started complaining about lack of diversity, the victimization of the specific identity group, etc. Always, always, always reminding everyone about how everybody was victimizing them. What happened? Smart, able, organized white guys left the protest. They threw up their hands and walked away. I was one of these people. It did more to change my political views than any book or screed or barroom conversation. I'm still for leftists, but I effing despise identity politics more than anything else. I'm convinced this is the reason why the left is so absolutely effed and useless today. Yeah, that is quite a damning statement, but it's absolutely true. Well, I've never been a part of any left-wing organization. I have interacted with left-wing people, and generally that's what happens. You just you can't do it. It's just like, okay, guys, And again, why is this? Well, none of this originates from any sort of historic leftist theory or dogma or principle. All of it's diametrically opposed to the concept of full employment. Because what happens when you double the workforce by bringing women into the workforce? You double it. So you have wages and you put it's that far away from full employment. And then you bring in the whole world through immigration, and you have the ideal conditions of capital, where you have labor weak, with very little buying power, very little bargaining power, and divided and powerless. All of this has entrenched capital, not advanced any sort of traditional left-wing value, which means that either these people never meant what they said and we're just using this as a cloak for power. Atheism is the epiphany of power, or they did mean it and were dupes. And I think we have both, right? So if you look at the falling out with the Young Turks, you still have Sejimi Thor and Max Blumenthal and Aaron Mate, which are still anti-imperialist, still pro-organized labor. They still have some contradictory beliefs, I think, but at least they mean what they say and say what they mean, unlike a lot of their other colleagues who just completely sold out, for lack of a better word. And so we have this new synthetic left, and I think that's just the best word for it right now. That is completely, it's the bodyguard of global capital, and it will do anything it can in order to destroy it. And the reason why they've targeted these three groups, religious people, men, and people of European descent, is because, while they don't know it, the people in power know that those are the only ones that they really have to worry about. They're the ones that will overthrow the system. Those are the ones that are, organize and hold capital's feet to the fire, like we used to, all the time. And now that is so far removed now. We've turned the clock back to like 1870 as far as labor rights. We used to have an 8-hour workday, and now they can work you 12 hours a day, 14 hours a day without lunch. One of the last jobs I had, people were routinely being worked 12 hours a day without lunch. Ridiculous. All of it's been undone. And how is it undone? By attacking these three groups and shoving diversity down our throats, so now we're all basically screwed. So these people were either never serious or they were power-hungry megalomaniacs, or they were just mentally incapable. I don't know what it is, because from the framing that we get from classic left-wing thought, none of this makes sense. It's all antithetical to everything I've ever read in Marxist literature, anarchist literature, even like the old non-socialist unions of America. It's just like with the AFL. It's completely insane. And because what's ended up happening is they have let the capitalists define their terms. Because equality is just crude fungibility. And of course, let's also talk about the issue of inequality. All inequality is assumed to be bad without justification. Now, it's not a hard sell to argue that people at the top of a corporate board power like Walmart, or the head of a government like the U.S. federal government, is bad because of centralized power, right? Even quote unquote right libertarians can admit, yeah, it's a problem. We don't want that. Okay. But there's three other ways you can have power inequality. One is, even if you assume you have an equal playing field, you can have inequality because some people are better at the game. So let's say you have chess, right? And there's no advantages given to anyone, but they have innate advantages of knowing of just being better at the game. And if you play the game long enough, they'll rise to the top. That's not a conspiracy. It just is. Another one is age. Older people, that's called the Matthew principle, by the way. The more you do something, the better you get at it. So some people are innately better because of predispositions. Other people are better because they've done it longer. Old people get to catch in on the Matthew principle, and they have advantages because they're older. They've got more money. They've got more skills. They can be more competitive in the marketplace if they're still looking for a job. All right. And then so thirdly, and this is the one that nobody wants to talk about, but is painfully obvious, is the other form of inequality is based off of biology. So, for example, in nature, gorillas are stronger than men. Now, nobody's going to say, "Oh, this is a huge problem of inequality we have to solve." One gorilla is as strong as like 7 men. We gotta handicap a gorilla. No. Of course, that's ridiculous. And of course, that would give the gorilla certain advantages in a fight. Assuming men didn't bring a gun to that fight. But because a man is on average stronger than a woman, then it's like, oh, that's not nature. That's just, unwarranted privilege. I mean, this is literally insane. And the reason why nobody talked like this before the Industrial Revolution is this crude, fungible view of equality was not possible before the Industrial Revolution. And more to the point, it plays to the benefits of capitalism. Because as I said in my video about Jevons paradox and energy consumption, what do we see? Right, when women enter the workforce, they can now be taxed. So you've increased the tax revenue for the federal government, and of course the goal of the left is to dismantle the government as well. So by doubling its revenue base, that's stupid. And then the other thing is you have the bargaining power of laborers because you double the workforce. So, wow, like that literally makes no sense. It's insane because the goal is to have full employment and then a national strike. So the stupid, it burns. I don't know what to say. It's just never been, but it's never been clearly thought out. That is the problem. Whether it's Nechayev or Lenin or others, they have means of getting power, but they don't know what they want to do with it. And as Slavoj Žižek said, what is day one after the revolution? Nobody knows. So the more broad point, the most broadest point of all that I can make is what even is leftism? What does it look like when it wins? Now, we can ask that question in a historical sense. And in a historical sense, that means a totalitarian state that purges and liquidates vast parts of the population. Soviet Union, China, smaller states like Vietnam and North Korea. That's what it looks like in practice. But then we could say, well, that's hashtag not real. Okay, well, what does it look like in theory? We don't even have an in theory example. Now, let's put it this way. Obviously, to paraphrase Helmut von Moltke, no plan survives contact with the enemy. No theory of human political existence will survive in a pristine form against actual attempts to implement it. But let's look at the Constitutional Convention and the Founding Fathers. They had a series of discussions and letters written about ancient and medieval and near present in their own day, so 16th, 17th century, political experiments. What could be learned from them and how they could be implemented in America, which has led to a far more stable system than what we've seen with, radical leftist attempts at doing this, because they actually put some forethought into what they thought it ought to look like at the end of the day. And the left has never done that. So the left doesn't know what it wants. It doesn't have a final goal in mind other than some vague, cartoonish, childish, Teletubbies utopia, which never seems to arrive. And we always seem to end up going to one of the levels of Dante's Inferno instead. And the other thing is the people who could actually effectively organize resistance against state power and corporate power are constantly unilaterally attacked all the time. And it's clearly not in the interest of the people getting attacked. It's clearly not in the interest of any legitimate anti-capitalist. It only serves the interest of the capitalists in power. And the fact that they can't see this or won't see this, again, some do. I read one that did. They're not in the ascendancy. They're being drubbed out. And now we've seen a complete flip-flop when it comes to foreign policy. Apparently, U.S. warmongering escalating to World War III in Ukraine with Russia is A-okay, but Bush was bad for invading Iraq. Yeah, again, I don't know what to say. It is why I am not a leftist. It's ridiculous. They've shown themselves to be completely faithless. They will change on a dime and stab their own comrade in the back. And we saw this with Lenin's purges. We saw this with Khrushchev denouncing Stalin. We've seen this with how the left has eaten itself even now in the United States, and has now become this bizarre mutated creature of capital that protects globalism, even though they used to have anti-globalist rallies all over the country. And yeah, it's like the innate because here's the ultimate, right? Even the most indomitable man, even if he were Hercules, he would be at the power of the state as weak as any other woman. And we've seen this time and time and time again. The state can accrue to itself so much power, and large corporations can accrue to themselves so much power that the inequality between a man and a woman, between a chess grandmaster and a novice, between an older person and a younger person, are just qualitatively different kinds of things. Because nobody in those positions can just unilaterally do this. Not to the degree that a king or a merchant, prince or a CEO or a dictator could do. None. It's ridiculous. So you can't actually. It is obvious. It is obvious, but they choose not to see it because they've been conditioned not to see it. There was an interesting film called Kim, during the golden age of Hollywood. I think it was 50s or 60s, where this Indian kid during the Great Game of the 19th century was being trained to be an agent for the British government. And they have this wonderful scene where they are breaking him by conditioning him to believe what they're told, even if it means denying what his eyes see. And he says, I'm going to drop this plate or dish on the ground and tell you that it's going to reassemble itself. But it's not, it's broken, right? But the movie sets it up so that you see from Kim's perspective, the conditioning is teaching him to see the the plate come back together. The other thing is we see this with Bertrand Russell in his scientific outlook and the impact of science on society. He says that through conditioning, you will get people to admit the opposite of what their senses tell them, that black is white and white is black. And a lot of this is because we've been caught in this web of conditioning. Okay, again, how many of us have heard the idea that, going back to the 70s, 80s, and 90s, that propaganda, that the corporations with ads was a kind of propaganda against the people, right? You had Noam Chomsky, manufacturing consent. You had ad busters. You are the product. Did any of them stop watching TV? Did any of them take this seriously? No. None of them didn't take any of this seriously. And now, because of the subtlety of ads, the very thing that got me to stop having a TV. I mean, I watched manufacturing consent and I'm like, whoa, this is bad. It works even when you don't, even when you know it's operating. So I just don't have a TV. But these people, they couldn't do that. They couldn't, they're gonna fight capitalism. They're gonna fight the state. They're gonna smash the patriarchy, but they can't give up their freaking TV, which then brainwashes them into becoming cheerleaders for World War III. I mean, it's a joke. If there ever was a chance at stopping industrial civilization or capitalism, that was a long time ago. We're just going to have to ride this out. And again, it's in large part because the left is completely impotent, incompetent, and it attacks the people that aren't the problem, right? When the Bolsheviks go around killing Christians and Muslims, dude, we're not the ones running Wall Street. You literally make all of your enemies from the people that aren't really the ones hurting you. And so what ends up happening is they're not even attacking, the power structure that's oppressing them. What I think is in part the cause of this idea of the patriarchy is that, in the 50s and 60s, when this was getting rolled out in the United States and you had those boys clubs, the people you ran up against were men because they were still in charge of society. But, when I went to school and when with the great diversity quotas, now those people aren't in charge. Well, they're in charge of the top maybe, but they're not in charge of middle management. One of the things that the left said, I remember this very clearly during Occupy Wall Street, no less. They said, we don't just want women and minorities to be a part of the capitalist power structure because that would not be a win for us. We want the abolishing of the capitalist power structure. The very same people who said that are now cheerleading this. There was a documentary, The Corporation, which was like a 3-hour documentary that was all over YouTube at the time. They said very much the same thing. Now they're waving the rainbow flag against Trump and, all the other stuff. Because I guess it's okay now, corporations can use tokens and we're okay with it anyhow. Literally people who said the exact opposite are now saying this now. So, yeah, in a nutshell, the left attacks who I am for completely atavistic reasons. It doesn't have a coherent view of how things are working. It's entirely reactionary to the capitalist structure and is using capitalist terminology all the time, which is why it loses via Sun Tzu. You have to fight the enemy on new ground. And they're demanding, they have no vision. Like, what does it look like when we're all, equal? No one knows. You ask 10 different leftists that question, you get 20 different answers. All right, guys, let's check out the chat here. Chit chat. Master Sanders, hello. The United Path. Most of the Radlib left just wants the Nordic model plus utilitarianism. The untried path. Leftism normally leads to tyranny. Yeah. Let's see. Untied path. Yeah. Oh, I just got a super chat. 32 shekels from Ori Sazanov. Thank you very much. Let's see here. See, the fake left accuses others of being fascist because they themselves are fascist and they secretly impress both. Well, I mean, if by the fake left you mean the synthetic left, then you're right. Because one of the things that defined fascism historically was the idea of the proletarian nation. Italy under Mussolini later adopted that concept. The idea that your racial identity or your class identity, or sorry, not class identity, your race identity or your gender identity is a class identity is not just kind of fascism. It's actually the definition of fascism. This is where you get the idea of the proletarian nation. So now we have the proletariat sex, which is woman. We have the proletariat preference, which is homosexuality. And we have the proletariat nation, which is Native Americans and other minority groups. That's actually fascism. Forge Warhammer. Putinism and Zism isn't exactly Marxist, Leninist, but actually Putin and Z are influenced by their countries having been formerly communist. Yes. Forge Warhammer. I think the Mongol Empire had a major impact on the nature of 20th century communism in Russia and China. Yeah, probably. Forge Warhammer. Primitivism is not going to be a solution for future issues. No, probably not. I mean, I don't think that necessarily all anti-capitalist or even all anti-industrial positions have to be Stone Age primitivists, but point taken. No, Kevin, you're wrong. Dude, just read anything about Native Americans. The Forge Warhammer, bro, the socialist movement started in Western Europe. Yeah, I know it did. Maybe you're not talking to me, but that's fine. Let's see here. M. Lull. So the Indian Wars weren't always 100% white versus red, Forge Warhammer. Well, actually, that's the case. So let's look at two classic Indian Wars from the Puritan period of New England, 1620 to 1690. We have the Pequot War of 1638, and we have the War of King Philip in 1675. Well, what we have with the first instance is the neighboring tribes, such as the Narragansetts, which were neutral, the Mohegans, and others were either neutral or on the side of the Puritans. When we get to, say, the issue of the Battle of King Philip's War, it's about a 50-50 split. We see the same in Mexico when Cortez shows up. Of course, he's fighting the Aztecs, but then the Tlaxcala and other tribes join his cause. So, no, the idea is that there was not a unified front. And, of course, Europeans fought each other as well. French fought the British. Each had different Indian allies. The Spanish fought the French and the British. M. For a group that talks about material conditions being so fundamental, the left sure does take material abundance for granted. Ooh. Here we go, yes. So, there you go. Let's see here. I don't know what that's supposed to be about. M. Lenin actually implemented the NAP with some kind of tacit admission that war communism doesn't work. Let's see here. Kevin Turwey, facts when people lie about Native Americans to denigrate. You're literally just making this stuff up, dude. Just look at the history of the Lakota. They moved in from Michigan into that territory and drove out the Cheyenne, the Kiowa, and the Shoshone. This is just lunatic fantasy land. Marxists and socialists used to read books. I'm not going to insult the OG Marxists. They read history books. They understood what was going down. Applied virtue. What you find with these movements is that they are not only illogical, but actively hostile to logic. Let's see here. Forge Warhammer. Irony is the Cherokee took black slaves with them on the Trail of Tears. They were also highly resistant to free their slaves in Indian territory until they signed a treaty with moral outrage prophet. I'm going with the incapable maniac. There we go. Violinist William. Even Chomsky can't answer what he would do with it. I know. M. When leftism wins, it looks like the French Revolution. Violinist Williams, he literally says free democratic communities get to decide. Then when people ask him what he means, he comes up with trade councils and workers' councils. Newsflash, we call that middle management. Yeah, that's true. Fun Smart, Pink Floyd's The Wall understood that politics is working out of personal psychology issues. Minoan, Indian history hasn't been POC washed just like the 1619 Project. It's mostly horse hockey since the 60s. Yeah, exactly. It's all crap. I mean, there was a culinary history of America that I was reading a while back, and this Sioux warrior was asked by, after his tribe had been defeated, by an American reporter, "Did you actually eat the hearts of your enemies?" And he says, "One does strange things when one is young." So that was his excuse. The Untried Path. Enver Hoxha killed all his closeted comrades of his first purge. Yes. Let's see here. There's a TV right behind you. Busted. No, that's not one that I actually use. Let's see here. Forge Warhammer, full of Kraut's obvious faults. He was right when he said the far left will eat itself. Well, yeah, because it always does. Well, they're going to fight the Indians. Okay, let's go back to Nicaragua, right? The Sandinistas attacked the Mosquito Indians who got aid from the CIA to fight a counterinsurgency. Oh, so much for indigenous people's solidarity. I mean, this is one dumpster fire after another. I've been covering the book Black on Red about Black American engineer who served in the Soviet Union. It's shocking learning about the propaganda and lies and how people were controlled 24/7. Yeah. Oh, well, yeah, this is a good point, Em. Fun Smart. Webb Du Bois brought in proto-fascist ideas about identity politics and the left that he learned from German nationalists. Well, the actual, okay, this is funny, right? Look at like Black nationalists in America, which is considered a left-wing movement with like the Black Panthers. Under its origin with Marcus Garvey, he boasted of being the first fascist. Marcus Garvey said that Mussolini got fascism from him. Now, of course, I think that's rather silly. But what that shows us, though, is that Black nationalism originally identified itself as fascist, as fascist. And again, that's what we get for the proletarian nation. So let's see here. Minoan, I consider the left kind of brain dead, yet many people are leftists. He draws her somehow. What do you think? Yeah, they're crazy. I mean, Kevin, bro, just dry up. You didn't watch any of the video. I mean, you have no idea what you're talking about. Forge Warhammer. I'm not sure if Folly wants me to bring this up, but Ted Kaczynski's Unabomber Manifesto really sets a good argument on how the left can't function without high reliance on industrial tech. That's actually true, yes. I've learned a lot from the manifesto. And let's see. Not much more to say here, guys. Thanks for tuning in. A little more high energy than usual. Don't forget to check out my locals. This is Todd Lewis of the Praise of Folly podcast, signing off.